The first time I felt it, it wasn't anything I could explain. Just a prickling at the back of my neck, a pressure in the air that didn't match the cheerful, sunlit cottage we had rented for the weekend. It was supposed to be a break. My partner and I had been working non-stop, worn down by endless routines, craving somewhere quiet and beautiful to spend 3 days away from the city. The listing had looked perfect: a secluded Airbnb near the edge of a forest, a cozy one-bedroom cottage with exposed beams, a fireplace, and large windows that overlooked trees stretching into the distance. The pictures had been flawless, staged with warm light and rustic charm. When we pulled into the gravel driveway, it looked exactly like the photographs. Almost too exactly. The curtains were drawn in the same way, the chairs positioned just so, even a folded blanket on the couch lying at the same angle as the staged images. I remember laughing about it, saying, "Guess they didn't want to move anything since the photo shoot." My partner shrugged. Neither of us thought much about it at the time. Inside, the air was faintly cool. It smelled of wood and pine with a sharper undercurrent, maybe cleaning chemicals or polish. The kind of smell you'd expect in a place kept up for visitors. We unpacked slowly, cooking dinner, opening a bottle of wine, settling in for what we hoped would be a simple, relaxing night. That's when the first odd thing happened. While pouring glasses, I noticed a small blinking light in the reflection of the window. It caught my eye only because the curtains were mostly shut, and outside it was already getting dark. The light pulsed faintly, rhythmic, red. I turned. Nothing, just the room. My partner asked what I was looking at. I told them I thought I saw a blinking light, maybe from a charger, but when we checked, we couldn't find the source. We chalked it up to headlights passing or a reflection. Still, the unease lingered. That night, lying in bed, the silence pressed against us. No traffic, no neighbors, only the forest murmuring outside. It should have been peaceful. Instead, I felt watched. My partner fell asleep quickly, but my eyes refused to close. I stared at the ceiling beams, heart slow but heavy, every creak of the house making me flinch. Around midnight, I heard it. A soft click, mechanical, faint but clear. I sat up, straining my ears. Another click, then a low electrical hum like a small device activating. I told myself it was the fridge, or maybe the heating system. But when I looked toward the corner of the room, I saw it. A tiny, dark circle on the smoke detector, almost invisible in the dim glow. And that circle, it blinked red. The hair on my arms rose. My chest felt hollow. I leaned closer, climbing onto the chair beneath it. There, almost flush with the plastic housing, was a lens. A camera. It was pointed directly at the bed. I didn't scream. I didn't wake my partner. Instead, I climbed down slowly, knees trembling. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip my phone. I pulled it up, recording the blinking light, zooming in on the glassy pinpoint that reflected just enough to reveal itself. I wanted to believe it was just part of the smoke detector. Maybe a motion sensor, maybe nothing. But as soon as I searched online, the truth struck cold. It was a model commonly sold as a hidden nanny cam. I felt sick. I woke my partner, whispering harshly, showing them the footage. They paled, swore under their breath, then yanked the battery out of the detector entirely. The blinking stopped, but my pulse did not. We tried to sleep again, but both of us lay there wide-eyed, adrenaline surging. Around 3 in the morning, we heard something. A thump, not from the walls, not from the floor above, from my phone. I'd left it on the nightstand, still recording. When I picked it up, I froze. The recording app was no longer running. Instead, the screen glowed with a strange file name, as if something had been sent or accessed. My partner reached for it, but before we could scroll, the screen flickered and went black. Battery dead. Except it had been fully charged an hour earlier. The next morning, we called the Airbnb host. Or rather, we tried. The number listed with the booking went straight to voicemail. The message was strange. A voice, distorted, echoing faintly, saying, Leave a message after the tone. We left one, angry and shaken, but no call came back. Instead, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. When I answered, silence. Then, static. And under the static, a sound. Breathing. I hung up immediately. We decided to leave, packing in a frenzy, tossing everything into bags. But as I zipped my suitcase, something fell out from underneath the bed. A small black device, about the size of a matchbox. Another camera, but this one wasn't like the others. Its casing was cracked, wires exposed, as if it had been tampered with, and scratched into the side, faint but deliberate, was a word. Stay. We didn't stay. We drove away, refusing to look back. But the story doesn't end there. When we got home, I plugged in my phone to charge and checked the files again. The recording from the night before was still there. I hit play, bracing myself. First, it was normal. Just static, shuffling, the faint sound of us moving in bed. Then another voice joined. Not ours. It was low, male, murmuring words I couldn't quite make out. It wasn't coming from the room. It was speaking directly into the microphone. I replayed it again and again, volume up. On the sixth try, I finally understood. The voice said, "We see you when you sleep." That should have been enough to throw the phone away, to delete everything, to run. But curiosity can be dangerous. I uploaded the file to my computer, adjusting levels, enhancing audio. As I did, I noticed something else. The video had frames, not just sound. It had recorded faint shapes, and one of those shadows leaned over the bed. It wasn't us. It wasn't human. A tall, crooked shape loomed, featureless but distinct, standing over us as we slept. For one frame, it turned its head toward the camera, and its eyes glowed. I deleted the video, or at least I tried. But no matter how many times I emptied the recycle bin, the file came back. Different names, hidden in folders I hadn't created. Then, nights later, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I ignored it. The voicemail notification blinked. I pressed play. A whisper filled the room. Not static. Not breathing. Just two words. Still watching. That was months ago. Since then, my phone glitches randomly. My laptop turns its camera light on at night, even when it's shut. I've covered them with tape, but somehow the footage still appears. Files populate my desktop with timestamps of when I'm asleep. Sometimes I open them. Most times I don't. But when I do, the figure is always closer. And now, I think I know the truth. The Airbnb didn't just hide cameras. It opened something. A window. And whatever leaned over us that night, it never left. Story 2. The college apartment. The lease had been signed in a rush, the way most things in college happened. Darren hadn't even looked at more than a few photos before wiring his half of the deposit. All he'd cared about was that the apartment was close to campus, cheap enough to keep him afloat on his part-time job, and, according to the ad, recently renovated. But the moment he carried the last cardboard box into the small two-bedroom apartment, he realized how thin those words were. Renovated meant a coat of beige paint sloppily brushed onto walls that still bore the dents and stains of past tenants. The carpet had been replaced, but its chemical smell clung to the air like something trying too hard to hide rot beneath it. And though the blinds hung straight and the overhead light worked, something about the space felt already occupied. The other room had been claimed by his new roommate, Kyle, a computer science major with a permanent headset glued to his ears. Kyle seemed fine, maybe even nice, but their schedules rarely overlapped. Kyle played games through the night, Darren studied during the day, and they exchanged only brief nods in the kitchen or while brushing their teeth in silence. It was Darren's second week in the apartment when he noticed the first odd thing. He'd been sitting at his desk, scribbling notes for his psychology midterm, when his laptop camera light blinked on, just once. A quick green flash that vanished before he even had time to process it. He froze, staring at the tiny lens above his screen, but nothing else happened. At first, he dismissed it as a glitch. Laptops did that sometimes, stray signals, faulty software, updates running in the background. But that night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on him. The room was silent, the blinds pulled down tight, yet every time he rolled over, he felt as though someone was leaning close, inches away, watching. He told himself it was stress, exams, adjusting to new surroundings. But the next morning, when he reached for his phone, he noticed it had been tilted slightly on his nightstand, as though it had been moved while he slept. And when he turned the screen on, his stomach dropped. The front camera app was open. For days, Darren tried to convince himself there was an explanation. Maybe he tapped it accidentally. Maybe Kyle had bumped into the nightstand when walking past his room. But the unease burrowed deeper. He began setting his phone face down before bed. He taped over his laptop camera. He checked the lock on his bedroom door 3 times before turning off the light. And still, he dreamed of being watched. The dreams were vivid, almost tactile. He would feel the press of a lens on his skin, the cold stare of glass hovering inches from his face. Sometimes he would wake up swearing he'd heard a click, like a camera shutter echoing faintly in the dark. Then came the photo. He found it while scrolling through his gallery, searching for a picture he'd taken of his lecture notes. It was buried between screenshots and memes, a photo he had no memory of taking. His blood ran cold as he stared at it. It was him, asleep in bed. The angle was wrong, taken from above as though someone had been standing over him. His mouth hung slightly open, his arm thrown across the sheets. The photo was dated at 3:17 a.m., a time he'd been sound asleep. He stared at it for what felt like hours, heart hammering in his chest. Then, almost against his will, he began scrolling further back. His gallery was littered with them, images of him sleeping, spanning nights, weeks, maybe longer. Some were taken from just inside his doorway. Others were inches from his face. One photo caught him mid-turn, eyes half open, as though he'd almost woken to catch whoever was holding the camera. The apartment suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in. He confronted Kyle that night, barging into his room without knocking. Kyle tore off his headset, blinking in confusion. "What the hell, man?" Kyle asked, spinning in his chair. "Are you taking pictures of me?" Darren's voice cracked with panic. Kyle stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "What? No. Why would I?" Darren shoved the phone in his face, scrolling through the images. Kyle recoiled, shaking his head. "Dude, that's messed up." But it wasn't me. He sounded sincere, too sincere. Darren didn't believe him, not at first. But over the next week, he started to notice things he couldn't explain. At night, long after Kyle had gone quiet in his room, Darren would hear faint scratching inside the walls. Not the scuttle of mice. This was slower, more deliberate, like fingernails dragging across drywall. Sometimes it would start near the baseboards and climb upward, halting just behind the headboard of his bed. The air would turn cold then, so cold that his breath plumed white in the dark. And always, after the scratching stopped, his phone would buzz with a new notification. A fresh photo. Another image of him lying there, wide-eyed and frozen, pretending to sleep because he was too afraid to move. Desperate, Darren set up his own counter-surveillance. He propped his phone on his desk, recording video through the night. He borrowed an old webcam from the library and plugged it into his laptop, leaving it pointed at the corner of the room. The next morning, the video files were gone. Deleted. All except for one. The webcam had captured a brief 2-second clip. The room bathed in moonlight, Darren motionless under his blanket. Then a shape leaning in from the corner of the frame. Pale. Long-limbed. Its face a blur of shifting static like a screen caught between channels. The figure tilted its head, hovering inches above Darren's sleeping face, and then blackness. He unplugged everything after that. No cameras. No recordings. He didn't want proof anymore. Proof meant it was real. The scratching worsened. Sometimes it came from the ceiling, sometimes from under the floorboards. Once, he swore he heard breathing inside the closet, deep and labored, timed perfectly to his own. And then came the whisper. It started softly, almost like a draft slipping through the cracks. His name breathed low and lingering. Darren. He pressed his hands over his ears, but the sound burrowed inside his skull. Darren, look. The phone screen lit up on his nightstand. Another photo. Only this time he wasn't alone in the frame. Behind him, in the dark corner of the room, stood the thing. Its body stretched too tall for the ceiling, limbs bending unnaturally, fingers curled around something small and glinting, a camera. By the end of the semester, Darren was a wreck. His grades slipped, his hair hung limp and greasy, and his eyes carried the weight of countless sleepless nights. Kyle kept his distance, though sometimes Darren caught him glancing nervously at the walls, like he'd heard the scratching too. Once, Darren asked him directly, "You hear it, don't you?" Kyle didn't answer. He just moved out 2 weeks early, leaving his key on the counter without a word. Alone now, Darren wandered the apartment like a prisoner, every sound amplified, every shadow a threat. He stopped locking the door to his bedroom. What was the point? Locks didn't keep it out. The final straw came on a rain-soaked Thursday night. He was lying awake, staring at the ceiling, when the phone buzzed again. Hands trembling, he picked it up. The photo showed him as he was now awake, staring into the dark. But this time, the angle wasn't from above. It wasn't from the doorway. It was from inside the bed. The perspective was impossibly close, as though the lens was nestled against his chest, rising and falling with his breaths. And in the corner of the image, nestled against his ribs, was a pale, leering face. Darren didn't go back to the apartment after that night. He packed a single duffel bag and fled, crashing on a friend's couch until he found another place. Any place to live. But the thing about surveillance is that once you know you're being watched, you can never unknow it. Even now, in his new apartment across town, he wakes to the same cold air, the same scratching in the walls. He scrolls through his phone each morning, dreading what new photo he might find. The last one was only a few days ago. It was him again, curled on his side, mouth open in sleep. But this time, the background wasn't his old apartment. It was his new bedroom. Story 3. I arrived at the hotel just past midnight, exhausted after a long drive that stretched hours beyond what I had planned. The rain hadn't helped, streaking across my windshield like skeletal fingers clawing for my attention, forcing me to keep my hands clamped to the wheel. When I finally pulled into the small town, I found the hotel sitting on the edge of a long, empty road, its neon vacancy sign flickering like a dying heartbeat. I told myself I didn't care what it looked like. All I needed was a bed, a shower, and a few hours of sleep before I hit the road again. The clerk at the front desk was half asleep, barely glancing up when I asked for a room. He slid me a key card without a word, his hands trembling slightly as he pushed the paperwork across the counter. I noticed his eyes dart to the security cameras in the lobby, as though he was afraid of something. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but the exhaustion won out, and I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The hallway was long and narrow, carpeted in a pattern of swirling reds and golds that looked like it hadn't been changed in decades. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something sweeter, almost metallic, that I couldn't place. My room was at the very end of the hall, room 316. The number glared at me in tarnished brass as I slid the card and pushed the door open. The room was plain. A queen bed with stiff white sheets, a single chair by the window, a desk with a small lamp, and a flat-screen TV mounted to the wall. It was no better or worse than any budget hotel I'd stayed in before. But something about the air felt heavy, like the kind of silence that comes after a scream. I set my bag down and moved to close the curtains, but froze when I noticed the faintest red, glowing in the dark. It blinked once, steady and deliberate, My eyes narrowed, and I followed the light to a smoke detector above the bed. It wasn't unusual for hotels to have them, of course, but I leaned closer and realized it wasn't quite right. The casing seemed newer than the rest of the room, cleaner, almost out of place. A chill ran up my spine. Hidden cameras were always in the back of my mind when staying in hotels or rentals. Stories circulated online about people finding them in clocks, televisions, or detectors. I told myself I was just paranoid, but the longer I stared at that faint red light, the more it seemed to be staring back. Finally, I climbed onto the bed and pulled the smoke detector down. It came free too easily, revealing wires that didn't connect to anything useful. My heart dropped into my stomach when I saw the small lens staring out from the center. It was a camera. My hands shook as I yanked it free and set it on the desk, debating what to do. I could storm back down to the lobby and demand answers, but something told me the man at the desk already knew. Maybe he was the one who put it there. Curiosity overpowered fear. I wanted to know what was on it. I dug through my bag and pulled out my laptop, connecting the camera with a cable. After a few minutes of fiddling, the files appeared on the screen. Same bed, same curtains, same ugly carpet. Only the person in the bed was not me. It was a woman, asleep under the covers. For a few minutes, nothing happened. But then I saw it, the outline of something dark pressed against her side, indenting the mattress as though an invisible body was lying there with her. My chest seized. The figure didn't move like a person. It shifted and pulsed, as though made of smoke or liquid shadow, curling around her in an embrace. At one point, the woman stirred, her eyes flickering open as though sensing something, but before she could react, the shadow seemed to press her deeper into the bed. The video ended with her lying perfectly still, her eyes wide open, staring at nothing. I slammed the laptop shut, bile rising in my throat. It wasn't just voyeurism. It wasn't just cameras. Something else was in this room. I turned slowly, my gaze falling to the bed. The sheets were freshly made, tucked tight, but all I could think about was the way the mattress had sunk beneath that woman. As if something had been waiting for her. A pause. Then a whisper, so faint I almost thought I imagined it. "Lie down." The line went dead. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I glanced at the camera still sitting on the desk, wondering if this was part of some sick prank. But when I looked at the bed, I saw it, the faintest dip in the sheets, as though something unseen had shifted its weight there. I stumbled back, my legs slamming into the desk chair. The red recording light on the laptop flickered to life on its own, the screen illuminating with another video file. This one was labeled with today's date. The live feed showed me, standing in the room, pale and trembling. And beside me, barely visible in the corner of the frame, was a shadow. Taller than a man, thinner than a corpse, its form stretching toward me like fingers of smoke. I didn't stay to see more. I bolted for the door, yanking it open and sprinting down the hall. My footsteps echoed, but so did another sound, something soft, dragging along the carpet behind me. I didn't look back. I crashed into the elevator, jamming the button until the doors slid shut, and even then, I swore I felt something pressing against the glass. By the time I reached the lobby, the clerk was gone. The desk sat empty, the monitors behind it filled with static. I didn't wait. I ran out into the rain, fumbling for my car keys, nearly slipping on the wet pavement as I hurled myself inside. I drove until the town disappeared in my rearview mirror, until the neon sign of the hotel was swallowed by darkness. But even now, miles away, I can still feel the weight in my bed at night. The slight dip of the mattress, the cold air that clings to my skin. I never found out who installed that camera, or how many lives it recorded before mine. All I know is this: when I close my eyes, I see that video, the shadow curling against the woman, holding her as though it never wanted her to leave. And now I'm starting to think it never left me either. Sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I don't need a camera to know. I'm not sleeping alone. I drove until the town disappeared in my rearview mirror, until the neon sign of the hotel was swallowed by darkness. But even now, miles away, I can still feel the weight in my bed at night. The slight dip of the mattress, the cold air that clings to my skin. I never found out who installed that camera, or how many lives it recorded before mine. All I know is this: when I close my eyes, I see that video, the shadow curling against the woman, holding her as though it never wanted her to leave. And now, I'm starting to think it never left me either. Sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I don't need a camera to know. I'm not sleeping alone. I'm not sleeping alone.